In the dead of an English winter, with frost thick on the ground, medieval gardeners were eating fresh cucumbers. Not imported, not stored, grown from scratch in the snow. And the secret behind it? A steaming pile of horse manure, hot enough to burn your hand. That same trick would later be used to ripen pineapples, a tropical fruit in the coldest corner of Europe. No greenhouse gas, no electricity, just waste turned into fire. For centuries, variations of this knowledge were common across Europe. Then, in the space of 2 lifetimes, much of it gradually disappeared. Tonight, we're digging it back up. There's a version of gardening that no longer exists in most backyards across America, Britain, Canada, or Australia. It vanished so quietly that almost nobody noticed it was gone. And yet, 600 years ago, this forgotten system was the only thing standing between a family and hunger. Around the year 1440, an English gardener sat down and did something unusual. He wrote his life's work into verse. Today, historians simply call him John Gardner, and his poem survives as one of the earliest surviving gardening manuals written in English. But this wasn't poetry for pleasure. It was survival, encoded in rhyme, meant to be remembered and passed down. His garden ran on something modern gardeners rarely think about. Nothing. No fertilizer bags, no irrigation system, no seed catalogs. Every scrap of waste, every drop of water, every ounce of manure had a purpose. Nothing was ever thrown away because nothing could be replaced. Compare that to now, where even with far more money and far more products available, entire beds still collapse by midsummer under drought, pests, or neglect. So what did medieval gardeners understand that we've completely forgotten? The answer begins with a wall, a living one. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what a medieval garden actually was. It wasn't a hobby. It was infrastructure, a small plot tucked behind a cottage, expected to provide a family with food year after year without fail. There was no backup plan. If the garden failed, the family failed. Everyone in the household knew it. The first line of defense wasn't a fence. It was alive. Farmers planted hawthorn and blackthorn, let it grow for a few years, then cut each young trunk almost all the way through, bent it sideways, and wove it between wooden stakes. The tree didn't die. It healed sideways, shot new growth upward, and knit itself into a barrier strong enough to stop a bull. Some of these hedges, laid this way generation after generation, are still standing in the British countryside today, doing the same job they did hundreds of years ago. But a hedge needs stakes. Beans need poles. Baskets need rods. And there was no lumber yard to buy from. So gardeners turned to something even stranger. Trees that refused to die no matter how many times they were cut down. And that single trick would end up supplying almost everything the entire garden needed to survive. Cut a hazel or willow down to its stump, and something unexpected happens. It doesn't die. It fights back, sending up a ring of straight, fast-growing shoots. Within about 7 years, those shoots become full poles, ready to cut again, and the stump simply repeats the cycle. Some English coppiced stumps have been cut and regrown like this for hundreds of years and are, remarkably, still alive today. The garden didn't buy its own infrastructure. It grew it. Those same woven rods shaped how these gardens actually looked. Around the year 820, a plan was drawn for an ideal monastery in Saint Gall, in what is now Switzerland. Its kitchen garden was laid out in 18 neat, raised rectangular beds, each one-edged, contained, and dedicated to a single crop. Sound familiar? It should. This is the exact layout modern no-dig gardeners are rediscovering right now, often paying real money for timber kits to recreate it. But medieval gardeners built the same result with mud and sticks. Every bed was kept narrow enough to reach without ever stepping on the soil. The paths took the boots. The bed stayed soft, workable by bare hands, year after year, without ever needing to be dug hard again. And yet, an empty raised bed is still just a box of dirt. What filled it was where things got interesting. Here's where things get strange. The real engine of a medieval garden wasn't the soil. It was waste. Kitchen scraps, crop debris, animal bedding, hearth ash, and above all, manure. Records from medieval manors show something surprising. Dung was treated like currency. Households banked it, guarded it, turned it with a fork every few weeks like a savings account nobody could afford to lose. But here's the twist. The most valuable fertilizer in medieval Europe wasn't manure at all. It was pigeon droppings, several times richer in nitrogen than ordinary farmyard waste. So valuable that lords built entire towers called dovecots, lined with hundreds of nesting holes, just to harvest it. And here's the part that sounds almost unbelievable. In much of medieval Europe, only lords were legally allowed to own one. Those pigeons fed freely on peasants' grain, and peasants were forbidden by law to harm them. That resentment simmered in France for centuries, and it became one of the grievances peasants raised right up through the Revolution. Then comes the strangest secret of all. Pile fresh manure into a deep bed, and within days, its core turns hot enough to steam on a frozen morning. Medieval gardeners weaponized that heat, sowing seeds directly onto it in the dead of winter. The result? Cucumbers and melons, weeks ahead of any neighbor. And this trick, it turns out, is ancient. Roman gardeners used a version of this same trick nearly 2,000 years ago, just to keep Emperor Tiberius supplied with his daily cucumber, out of season, year-round. By the early 1700s, English and Dutch gardeners had pushed the idea even further, using layered fermenting manure to ripen an actual tropical fruit, pineapples, in the cold heart of a northern European winter. A furnace hiding in plain sight on every farm in Europe. Free, renewable, rebuilt fresh every single spring. Have you ever wondered why none of this survives today? The answer isn't complicated. Cheap fertilizer and cheap food arrived, and within roughly 2 lifetimes, an entire toolkit that had fed generations simply stopped being necessary. Nobody outlawed it. Nobody replaced it with something better. It just quietly stopped being passed down. But look closer, and the pattern repeats everywhere. Seeds were never bought. They were saved from the strongest plants, year after year, slowly becoming adapted to one exact patch of ground. Watering wasn't wasteful. A single pierced clay pot delivered water straight to the root, with nothing spilled. Even the orchard wasn't wasted space. Geese grazed beneath the trees, fertilizing as they went. This wasn't primitive gardening. It was precision, built entirely without money. So what does all of this actually mean for us right now? It means the modern garden isn't more advanced than the medieval one. In many ways, it's simpler and weaker because of it. Where medieval gardeners saw every scrap of waste as a resource, we see garbage. Where they saw a hedge as a living, self-repairing wall, we see a fence that rots the day it's built. Where they bred their seeds for their exact soil, we buy identical packets shipped from across the country, hoping they'll adapt. None of this required wealth. It required attention. A willingness to watch the land closely enough to notice that a cut willow doesn't die, that fermenting manure runs hot, that a crowded bed resists disease better than a tidy row. That kind of knowledge wasn't written down for centuries, because it didn't need to be. Every village already knew it. It was simply how you survived. Here's the one thing you can actually steal from all of this, starting this week: a hotbed. You don't need a bulletproof hedge or a dovecot to try a version of the same trick that once gave Roman and medieval gardeners their out-of-season cucumbers. Pile fresh manure or hot compost about 2 feet deep, cap it with 6 inches of soil, and let it heat up before you sow. The setup today looks a little different, but the same basic idea, using decomposition as free heat, is still sitting right under your nose. That knowledge nearly vanished completely. And in a world where even seasoned gardeners still lose entire harvests to a single dry July, maybe it's worth asking what else we let disappear along the way. The soil hasn't changed in 600 years. Perhaps it's time we remembered how to listen to it again. If this kind of forgotten, practical history is your thing, subscribe. There's a lot more of it buried, and we're going to keep digging it up.